Hey guys, it's Nancy with another tutorial. Today we're going to be going over how to design and sew patches. You can apply this technique to pretty much any design you come up with, but today I'm going to be going over how to make these little ditto patches. I thought they'd be a nice and easy project to start off with. Here in Photoshop I'm just drawing up my design. Not too amazing, just a blob with some eyes and a smile, but you would draw your design in any program you would like, and then I just added in the width that I wanted the satin stitch to be and drew that with a stroke and just made up two different colours so I could do a normal version and a shiny version. I saved those to the size that I wanted and imported them into my embroidery software. The first thing that I'm doing here is I'm creating a loop of satin stitching going all the way around. I'm just picking a nice bright pink colour just so that I can see where my lines are, and I'm tracing that satin stitch where I want that to go. So you would just go ahead and make a line of satin stitching however you would normally do that in your particular embroidery software. This is how I do it in mine. So once I've traced the entire shape, I just go in and I edit my points so that it matches my reference. You'll notice that when I go into the editing page, you can see the satin width, and you can see here when it does the preview that it matched quite well with my original drawing that I did. You can make it bigger or smaller to suit your design. I would probably only go between 4 to 8 millimeters wide. Too thin and it's difficult to trim the fabric underneath, and too thick and the satin stitches start to become a little bit unstable. The second thing that you need to go in and digitize is a single straight stitch that runs through the middle of your satin stitch, or potentially maybe 1 millimeter on the inside of the exterior of your satin stitch. For my program, I just make a copy of the original satin stitching and then turn that into a straight stitch. Because that original satin stitch, the points were in the middle, so you can see here that that green line is going to sit right in the middle of our pink satin stitching line. If you want to do it manually, all you need to do is trace a straight stitch in the middle of your satin stitching. This line is where we're going to trim both our stabiliser that we put under our patch as well as our fabric. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to go in and finish up the rest of our embroidered design. So the pink is going to be a base of Minky, but you could fill the entire thing with stitching depending on your design. It doesn't really make any difference to the process, except you wouldn't be putting down a layer of fabric when we get to doing that. So I'm just editing his little smile, his little eyes. I tried to do an outline of his mouth, but for some reason that didn't export with the file, but I thought they came out pretty cute anyway. The same file can be used for both the normal and the shiny version. I'm just checking in the preview that nothing is overlaying, nothing's a strange shape. The little reflective dots were a little bit too close to the satin stitching, so I moved them just a smidge. Now, the product that you definitely need for this project is called Wash Away Vilene. This is unbranded, but is essentially a wash away stabiliser that sort of is like tissue paper, but with a little bit more stretch and flexibility. I unfortunately lost the footage of me hooping up in my smaller hoop, so here's me hooping it up in my larger hoop, and it is fairly stretchy, so what I like to do is once I've doubled it up, I hoop it and then I pull it taut from all angles until it's nice and flat. The product that you want to avoid is Super Solvy or any Solvy, which are more like a plastic film kind of wash away. The reason you want to avoid those is because when you're making those tiny satin stitch marks, as your needle is puncturing through your stabiliser, that actually tears the Solvy film, and your patch will pretty much just remove itself from the stabiliser, whereas this one can be punctured many times and it won't come apart. Here it is in my smaller hoop, and what I'm doing here is I'm putting down 2 layers of tear away stabiliser on top of that. Here we want to stitch out that straight stitch twice, and the reason that I stitch it out twice per design is that so that when we pull away our tear away stabiliser, it does not break the stitches as easily, it just reinforces itself a little bit more. We want to take our hoop off our machine and we want to tear away all that excess stabiliser and then use scissors to trim out any bits that we missed. You want to have as little stabiliser as possible on the outside of that line, because any that's peeking out could potentially show through our satin stitching. This stabiliser underneath is going to provide a basis of support for our patches, so that the fabric is not just bending and floating wherever it pleases. I go ahead and use some basting spray, my 505 basting spray, which is like a spray glue, and I'm going to glue on both our pieces of Minky. We're then going to double stitch again with that straight stitch and repeat the same process. We're just going to get our scissors and trim as close as possible to those stitches to get rid of all that excess fabric. It took me a really long time here because my boyfriend had stolen my favourite sharp scissors to cut something in the kitchen, and I didn't find them until later that day. You want to get as close as possible. I wasn't able to get a perfect job here because I was using not my favourite scissors. So you'll see here that I've gone through already and I started the base of my satin stitch, which is zigzag, and I could see that there were some bits of Minky poking out. So I stopped it then and there, trimmed up that fabric that was showing outside of the satin stitch, and then proceeded to put the machine back on the hoop and do my final satin stitch with a layer of actual Solvay film, which this is a really good way to use that. So it's just a nice topper that's also wash away and it doesn't leave any residue like your white tearaway stabiliser would. Here I'm just adding the last bits of decorative stitching on top of our patches, so the little shine marks, the eyes and the mouth on our dittos. You can be as elaborate here as you want. One thing that I would recommend with these patches is try to not make your outline too extreme, too pointed or anything like that, because there is a potential of those parts becoming flimsy. So you had some very long pointy ears that were very thin that could potentially flop and not have much rigidity to them. After you finish your design, I just cut away any excess little stitches, got rid of our topper, and now I'm just cutting the excess of our wash away violin away. You can see that they look very much like little patches now. So unfortunately I lost the footage again of me washing away the wash away stabiliser. I don't like to submerge the Minky fully in water if I don't have to. So what I did was I cut away as much of that violin as possible from the sides without chopping into the actual satin stitching, and I'm going to, before I wash it away, I'm going to use a fray stopper. This is just going to act sort of like a glue and bind all those satin stitches together. I found that this was really necessary for this project and most patch making, because your satin stitches can become a bit flimsy if they're exposed to a bit of wear and tear. So having that fray stopper, even potentially 2 layers of that fray stopper on there, prevents any of your satin stitches from unravelling. So we've added our fray stopper and I've cut as close as possible as I can to our base satin stitching. And I'm just going to get a damp cloth and I'm just going to start rubbing away that water-soluble stabiliser from our edges. The reason I don't submerge it is just because it takes a really long time for the Minky to dry, and all you really need to do is get rid of the outside edge of that visible stabiliser. It washes away really easily, just your damp cloth and rubbing it side to side, and you'll be left with a perfect satin stitch border that doesn't have any stabiliser showing. And it should be nice and rigid, so your patch should be nice and rigid with the use of that fray stopper, as well as the tearaway, 2 layers of tearaway stabiliser underneath. If you then wanted to use these patches on a jacket or a bag, I would probably be carefully ironing on some double-sided adhesive using some sort of protector so that you don't burn your Minky in the process. But I hope you guys learned a lot from this. You can use it for all different sorts of patch making, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!